Here is what happened at the end. A county mediation room in Calhoun County, Mississippi. A folding table, 4 chairs. A mediator named Gerald Oakes, who had been doing this for 19 years and who, by his own later account, had never seen a county representative leave a room that quickly. On one side of the table, a 76-year-old man named Lester Dowd, his attorney, and a cardboard tube that had been sitting in a barn for 31 years. On the other side, 2 attorneys representing the county, one attorney representing the private purchaser who had acquired the property at auction, and a folder of documents that, as the morning progressed, became less and less useful to everyone holding them. By noon, the title to 211 acres in Calhoun County had been restored to Lester Dowd in its entirety. The private purchaser received $1 back. That was what he had paid. That was what he got. Here is how it started. The land had come to Lester sideways, the way the best things sometimes do. His mother's family, the Pritchetts, had farmed the eastern edge of Calhoun County for 3 generations. The land was not the Dowd family's land. It had belonged to an old man named Chester Pritchett, who was Lester's great-uncle by marriage, a distinction that had always meant less to Chester than simply the fact that Lester was the one who showed up. Chester had no children. He had a nephew in Memphis who called twice a year and a niece in Jackson who sent Christmas cards. He had 211 acres of mixed timber and bottomland cotton ground that he had worked since 1951, alone since his wife passed in 1979, and a border collie named Rue, who died in 2003 and after whom Chester never got another dog. Lester had started helping Chester in 1987. Not for pay, not at first. His own farm was 6 miles west, and he had enough of his own work. But he had driven by Chester's place one afternoon in late September and seen the old man on a ladder trying to nail back a section of barn roof by himself, and that had been the end of that. He had pulled in, climbed the ladder, and finished the job. He had been coming back ever since. Chester Pritchett was 81 years old in 1994 when he decided what he wanted to do with the land. He did not hire a lawyer. He did not call the nephew in Memphis. He called Lester Dowd and told him to come over on a Sunday afternoon, and when Lester came, Chester handed him a cup of coffee and said he wanted to deed him the land on one condition. The condition was that Lester work it, not develop it, not sell it, not let it go fallow, work it. Chester said he had spent 43 years keeping that ground in production, and he did not intend for it to sit idle after he was gone, and the only man he trusted to keep working it was the one who had been showing up for the past 7 years without being asked. Lester said he understood the condition. Chester said good. They shook hands. The deed was prepared by a lawyer in Bruce the following week. It transferred the 211 acres to Lester Dowd for a consideration of $1. $1, which Lester paid and for which Chester signed a receipt and gave it to him as a joke, because that was the kind of man Chester was. It included a working use covenant. It was recorded in the Calhoun County deed records in November 1994. Chester died in March 1997 in the same house he'd been born in at 84 years old, with his affairs entirely in order and no complaints about how things had gone. Lester Dowd had been working that land ever since. He ran cattle on the bottomland, cut timber from the eastern ridge on a sustainable rotation, and kept 40 acres in cotton that he sharecropped with a young family who lived 3 miles down the road and needed the ground. He drove out to the Pritchett place, he still called it that, and always would, 4 or 5 days a week, even in the years his knees started telling him things he did not want to hear. He kept the barn, he kept the fences, he kept the ground in production because that was the condition, and because he had shaken Chester Pritchett's hand on a Sunday afternoon in 1994, and that was the kind of man he was. The land gave back what you put into it. Lester had believed that his whole life. He had never stopped putting into it. He did not find out about the auction until it was already over. His daughter Louise called him on a Thursday morning in August 2021 and asked him if he knew anything about a tax sale listed in the county legal notices. She'd been reading the weekly paper. She still got the print edition, had since she was a girl, and she'd seen Lester's name beside a parcel description and a date 3 weeks past. He said he did not know anything about a tax sale. She read him the notice. It described a tax delinquency sale conducted by the Calhoun County Tax Collector's Office on July 22, 2021, for unpaid ad valorem property taxes on parcel 14-0882, 211 acres, rural Route 9, Calhoun County. The property had been sold to the highest bidder for $1. Mississippi law allowed for a $1 minimum bid at tax sales when no other bidders appeared. No other bidders had appeared. Lester said, "I paid those taxes." Louise said, "When?" He said, "In April, same as every year." He paid his property taxes in April because he had always paid them in April, because April was after the cotton money came in from the previous fall and before the spring expenses started stacking up. He'd been paying taxes on the Pritchett place since 1994. He had never been late, not once in 27 years. He drove to the county tax office that same afternoon. The clerk looked up his account. There was no record of a payment for the 2020 tax year on parcel 14-0882. He said there must be a mistake. The clerk said the records showed no payment. He said he had a receipt. The clerk said she could not process a dispute at the counter and gave him a form. He took the form. He drove home. He called a lawyer in Grenada named Tate Odom, who had handled property matters in Calhoun and Webster counties for 28 years and who listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Tate Odom said, "Do you have the receipt?" He said, "I have something better. Come out to the barn." Chester Pritchett had been a mapper, not a professional surveyor. He did not have the equipment or the training for that, but a man who drew things down on paper because he did not trust his memory and did not trust other people's descriptions of things that were his. He had hand-drawn a survey of the 211 acres sometime in the late 1960s, updating it in pencil as the fence lines moved or the creek shifted after a flood year. The survey was drawn on a large sheet of drafting paper, now yellowed and soft at the folds, with the property lines inked in black, and the internal features, the creek, the timber stand, the old well, the cotton fields, drawn in pencil with annotations in Chester's small, precise handwriting. In the lower right corner, Chester had written the date, October 1971. Below it, he had written a note that said, "Revised, 1979, 1983, 1991. Each revision was in different colored pencil, so you could see the history of the land layered in the drawing. Chester had kept it in a cardboard tube in the barn. He had told Lester about it in 1994 when he deeded the land over, and Lester had looked at it once, understood what it was, and left it in the tube in the barn, in the same spot against the south wall where Chester had kept it. The tube had sat there for 31 years. Lester Dowd was not a mapper. He was, however, a receipt keeper. He had a wooden box on the workbench in his own barn where he put paper things that mattered: payment stubs, insurance confirmations, receipts for seed and equipment and repairs, and every property tax receipt he had ever received for both his own farm and the Pritchett place. The box was not organized in any sophisticated way. The papers were layered by approximate year, oldest at the bottom, newest on top. He had never thrown one out. He found the 2020 tax receipt for parcel 14-0882 in under 4 minutes. It was a standard county receipt, printed on yellow paper with the parcel number, the amount paid, $1,847, the date of payment, April 8, 2021, and a county cashier's stamp. He had paid in person, as he always did, and the cashier had stamped it while he watched. He handed it to Tate Odom, who looked at it for a moment, then looked at Lester, then looked at the receipt again. He said, "The county sold your land for $1 after you paid $1,847 to keep it." Lester said, "That appears to be what happened." Tate Odom then asked about the survey tube. Lester brought it down from the shelf and pried off the end cap. He unrolled the survey carefully on the workbench, holding the corners flat with his palms. Odom looked at it for a long time. He looked at the boundary lines and the annotations and the revised dates and the precise, unhurried handwriting of a man who had understood what he was drawing. He looked up and said, "Who drew this?" Lester said Chester Pritchett did. Odom said, when? Lester said, 1971 mostly, some updates after that. Odom looked at the survey again. The boundary lines on Chester's 1971 drawing showed a fence line on the southeastern corner that ran 14 feet different from what the county's current parcel map showed. The county had, in a 2008 parcel remap, shifted the southeastern boundary of parcel 14-0882 in a way that placed a small wedge of the property outside the parcel's official record. It was a minor discrepancy in itself, less than half an acre. But that remapping had changed the parcel's recorded acreage from 211 to 208, and that 3-acre difference had triggered a reassessment that had generated a secondary tax notice in 2020 that had been sent to an address that was not Lester Dowd's address, because the reassessment had opened a secondary parcel record that still carried Chester Pritchett's name on it, 24 years after Chester had deeded the land away. The taxes that had gone unpaid were not on Lester's parcel. They were on a phantom parcel generated by the county's own remapping error, still attributed to a man who had been dead since 1997. The county had sold land it had incorrectly split from the deed, created a secondary record it had never properly closed, allowed taxes to accrue on that record under a dead man's name, and then sold it at auction for $1, without notifying Lester Dowd, whose name was on the deed, at any address he had ever lived at. Tate Odom called a surveyor in Oxford who had 34 years of experience with county parcel records. The surveyor came out the following week, walked the boundary with Chester's hand-drawn map beside him, and confirmed that the 1971 survey was accurate within normal hand measurement tolerances, and that the southeastern boundary shown on that drawing matched the original deed description exactly. The 2008 remapping had been an error. The secondary parcel had never legally separated from the primary deed. The surveyor's report took 9 days to prepare. It ran 22 pages. It included overlaid comparison maps showing Chester Pritchett's 1971 lines against the county's 2008 lines in clear and unmistakable disagreement. The receipt was 1 page, yellow, stamped. Together, they were enough. The mediation was held on a Tuesday morning in November 2021. The room was a converted storage space in the Calhoun County Courthouse Annex. Folding table, fluorescent light with a slight flicker in one corner that no one had gotten around to fixing. Gerald Oakes, the mediator, had a yellow legal pad and a habit of clicking his pen cap that he seemed unaware of. The county was represented by 2 attorneys from the county's contracted legal firm. They had reviewed the surveyor's report in advance. They had reviewed the tax payment receipt in advance. They had also reviewed their own parcel records, which showed the 2008 remapping and the secondary parcel and the notice sent to Chester Pritchett's address, an address that had not been a functioning address since 1997. The private purchaser, who had paid $1 at auction, was represented by a third attorney who had advised his client before the mediation began to have modest expectations. Lester Dowd sat across from them with Tate Odom. He had the receipt in a folder. The cardboard tube was beside his chair. The county's attorneys opened by acknowledging the surveyor's findings. They said the 2008 remapping had been an administrative error. They said the secondary parcel creation had been an unintended consequence of that error. They said the notification failure had resulted from outdated address records. They used the phrase good faith administrative process 4 times in 11 minutes. Tate Odom placed the receipt on the table. He placed the surveyor's report beside it. He said that Lester Dowd had paid every dollar of property taxes owed on the land described in his 1994 deed, on time, without exception, for 27 years. He said the county had sold land at auction that it had no valid basis to sell because the secondary parcel had never legally existed, because the deed had always covered the full 211 acres, and because the man whose name was on that deed had never been notified of any delinquency on any parcel he owned at any address he had ever occupied. He said the title had to be restored in full, the auction had to be voided, and the purchaser had to be made whole by the county, not by Lester Dowd, for whatever inconvenience he had experienced as a result of the county's own error. He said that if they wanted to proceed to litigation instead, the surveyor's report, the receipt, and the 1994 deed would be the entire case, and they were welcome to explain the 2008 remapping to a jury. Gerald Oakes clicked his pen cap. The county's attorneys conferred for 14 minutes. Then they came back and said they were prepared to agree to a full restoration of title and a county-funded settlement to the auction purchaser. The private purchaser's attorney confirmed that $1 returned in full would satisfy his client's interest. The mediation concluded at 12:08 p.m. Lester Dowd signed the restoration agreement. He capped the cardboard tube. He thanked Tate Odom. He drove home. He did not go into the house when he got back. He went to the barn first. He set the cardboard tube back against the south wall, in the same spot Chester had kept it, in the same spot it had lived for the better part of 50 years. He pushed the end cap back on until it seated. He straightened the tube so it stood flush against the wall. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Chester Pritchett had drawn that survey with a pen and a ruler and whatever instruments a man uses when he wants to know exactly what he has. He had updated it 3 times over 20 years. He had kept it in a tube in the barn because that was where a working map belonged, close to the land it described. He had drawn every fence line, every tree stand, every shift in the creek after a high water year. He had done it because the land deserved to be known precisely, and because a man who does not know exactly what he has cannot defend it. Lester had understood that in 1994 when Chester showed him the tube. He had understood it again today. He pulled the barn door closed behind him and went back outside to see what needed doing before dark. Lester Dowd wasn't the only one. 3 other families in Calhoun County received notices in that same 2021 tax sale cycle. Different parcels, same administrative breakdown, same phantom records generated by the 2008 remapping. 2 of them had already signed over quitclaim deeds before anyone told them they didn't have to. What happened when they found out is the next story. Subscribe. It's bigger than this one, and it ends differently. We'll see you there. Paste your script.